Welcome back to Revenge Plus, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable. Let's dive into today's unforgettable story. I was blindsided. I didn't see it coming, not for a second. One moment, I was going to work like any other day, coffee in hand, feeling confident about my future with the company I'd given everything to. And the next, I was handed an ultimatum: either I leave or they fire me. It was a power play, a move I could never have predicted. You know the feeling when you've invested years of your life into something, thinking it's a partnership, a shared vision. But then, in an instant, you realize it was never really a partnership to begin with. What shocked me even more wasn't the decision itself. It was the reason. I had been pushed out to make room for someone else, and that someone else was family. Their family, the whole thing had been set up for months behind my back. The person they wanted in my place wasn't even qualified for the job, but they didn't care about qualifications. What mattered was loyalty, blood loyalty. At first, I was angry. No, not just angry, I felt humiliated. To be discarded so easily, to be treated as nothing more than a stepping stone for someone else's gain. The worst part? It wasn't even about the job itself. It was about the fact that they were trying to erase my entire existence at the company. The emails, the meetings, the years of hard work, all reduced to nothing. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. This was about all of us, everyone who's ever been passed over, forgotten, or discarded for someone else's benefit. I wanted revenge. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Because in that moment, I realized something I should have known all along. The system isn't fair, and the people who get ahead don't always deserve it. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to sit back and let them win. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. Instead, I would take control. But you know what? They didn't see me coming. I didn't just walk away. I didn't let them push me out without a fight. I had something they didn't: my clients. The ones who trusted me, the ones who believed in me. They didn't care about the family politics or the nepotism that was happening behind the scenes. They cared about results, about reliability, and about integrity, things that the new hire didn't have. So I did what anyone would do in my position. I reached out. I told them what happened. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't hide behind the corporate veil. I laid it all out for them. And when they heard the truth, they stood by me. One by one, my clients followed me. And just like that, I became the threat they never expected. I had the power now. I had the leverage. But this wasn't just about business anymore. This was about proving that you don't have to be part of their inner circle to succeed. You don't have to play by their rules. You don't have to let them control your destiny. The people who had kicked me out thought they were on top. They thought they had it all figured out. But they hadn't counted on one thing. The real power isn't in the position you hold. It's in the relationships you build and the trust you earn. I wish I could say that everything was smooth sailing from there, but it wasn't. In fact, it got even more intense. The more success I found, the more determined they became to take me down. But I was prepared for that. I wasn't going to let them destroy me, not after everything I had worked for. So I took the fight to them with my clients by my side. And trust me, nothing beats the satisfaction of seeing the tables turn. But here's the thing they never realized. I wasn't just fighting to get back at them. I was fighting for something much bigger. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been pushed aside. Everyone who had been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. This was for all of us. The war wasn't over yet, but I had made one thing clear: they had underestimated me. And that would be their downfall. I remember the day everything started to change. The day I realized that I wasn't just being replaced, I was being erased. You see, the person they'd brought in to take my place wasn't just anyone. It was Rachel, a name I had heard tossed around in whispers but never thought much of. She was the cousin of the CEO's wife, and that alone gave her more leverage than any experience, any skill, or any knowledge of the company could ever offer. Rachel had no real background in the work we did. She didn't understand the intricacies of the clients, or the project management, or the culture we had spent years building. But that didn't matter, did it? In their eyes, Rachel was family. And in their world, blood was thicker than any business relationship. As soon as Rachel stepped into the office, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, small, barely noticeable things. But the more I observed, the more I saw the cracks beginning to form. She'd make comments about the way I ran things, criticizing decisions that had been working perfectly fine for years. She'd take credit for things I had initiated, rebranding my work as her own. She'd laugh and say things like, "I'm just trying to make things more efficient here. You know, what the company really needs. And every time she said something like that, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. I'll admit, I wasn't prepared for the level of manipulation I was about to witness. Rachel didn't just want my job, she wanted my entire existence within that company wiped out. The first sign of this was when she started to subtly isolate me. She'd change meeting times without informing me or schedule important discussions during my lunch breaks. If I ever tried to speak up, it was like I was talking to a brick wall. She'd brush me off, make it seem like I was overreacting. But it didn't end there. Rachel was clever. She knew exactly how to play the game. She'd plant doubts in the minds of our colleagues. "Why is Ivan always so busy?" she'd ask. "Is he really working hard, or is he just avoiding responsibility?" She'd make little remarks in meetings, undermining my decisions. "That's interesting, but I think we can do better." "What do you think, Rachel?" she'd ask, turning to her family members for support, and they'd always back her up. Slowly, over time, the team started to see me as less of a leader and more of a figurehead. The respect I had once commanded was eroding. But Rachel didn't just stop there. She had a way of making everyone feel like they were doing her a favor, like she was doing them a huge favor by letting them help her out. She played the role of the victim flawlessly, making it seem like she was just a humble person trying to make a difference in a company that had been too complacent. There I was, stuck in the middle of this power struggle, watching it all unfold. The way she smiled at me so sweetly while she was stabbing me in the back. The way she called me her mentor one moment and then erased every trace of my work the next. It was maddening. I couldn't escape it. But what really took me by surprise was how quickly the company leadership rallied behind her. It was like they were blind to everything that was happening. Every decision, every new hire, every change that Rachel implemented, it was all celebrated. And I realized then that this wasn't just a simple business reshuffle. It was part of a much bigger game. Rachel wasn't just there to replace me, she was there to control everything, to consolidate power, and to make sure that no one stood in her way. I kept thinking to myself, how can this be happening? How could they be so blind? The proof was right in front of their faces. Rachel didn't have the skills, the work ethic, or the vision that I had, but all that mattered was who she knew. The truth was irrelevant. I had something Rachel didn't have, something I had built for years, something I had earned through hard work, dedication, and trust. I had my clients. I knew they were my lifeline. And I also knew that Rachel, with her shallow knowledge and lack of understanding, couldn't keep them. They weren't loyal to her. They were loyal to me. But how could I get them to follow me? How could I turn the tables in my favor? That's when it hit me. I didn't need to play their game. I didn't need to be the one to grovel for my position. I had to fight back in a way they would never expect. I was going to show them that they couldn't just push me out of the picture like I was nothing. It wasn't long before I started to put my plan into motion. I knew that getting my clients on my side was the key, and so I began reaching out to them one by one. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but I was done with pretending that I wasn't being betrayed. I picked up the phone. I sent the emails. I made the calls. And when I told them what was happening, when I laid it all out, raw and real, they listened. They believed me. They weren't surprised either. They had seen the cracks in the company long before I had, and they didn't trust Rachel. They didn't trust the new direction she was trying to take the company. As soon as I saw the first client pull away from the company and follow me, I knew this was just the beginning. The floodgates opened. One by one, they came. Some of them had been with me for years, and some of them were newer clients who had quickly seen what Rachel was really about. But they all had one thing in common: they trusted me, and they were loyal to me, not some figurehead who had no real vision or understanding of their needs. By the time the next quarter rolled around, I was already running my own business, with half of the clients I had once served at the company. And the thing that surprised me the most was how quickly they adapted. They weren't just following me because they had to. They were following me because they believed in what I was doing. It was a win. No, it was more than a win. It was a statement. It was a declaration that no one could erase the work I had done. No one could take away my clients, my reputation, or my integrity, not without a fight. And Rachel, well, she was left scrambling, trying to hold on to what she never truly understood in the first place. I never imagined that things would spiral so quickly. It wasn't just about leaving a job anymore. It was about taking control of my future. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just angry at Rachel. I wasn't just frustrated with the leadership who turned a blind eye. No, I was angry at myself for allowing things to go this far. I had been complacent. I had been too trusting. And now I was going to make sure that I never made the same mistake again. I had a plan. A plan I'd been quietly developing ever since I realized what Rachel was trying to do. It wasn't a huge, dramatic scheme that would unfold overnight. It was something subtle, something that would grow over time. And it started with one simple decision. I wasn't going to give up on the relationships I had built. I wasn't going to let Rachel's family politics tear apart the trust I had carefully cultivated with my clients. I remember the first call I made. I had been dreading it for days, but I knew it was time. I had to speak up, to lay everything out in the open. The call wasn't long, but it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I told them everything, how I had been pushed out, how Rachel had manipulated the situation, and how the leadership had turned a blind eye to the nepotism taking over the company. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't hold back. And to my surprise, they listened. It wasn't just the shock of hearing the truth that got them. It was the realization that they had been blindly following a system that had no real loyalty or respect for the people who made the company successful. They knew my work, they knew my reputation, they knew what I had brought to the table, and that was something Rachel and the leadership couldn't fake. But here's the kicker, I didn't just call one client, I called them all. And each time I heard the same thing, "We're with you." It was like a snowball effect. Once the first few clients signed on, the rest followed. It wasn't a matter of me begging or pleading with them. It was about the trust and value I had earned from years of hard work. They had seen the shifts happening at the company, and they weren't blind to the fact that Rachel, as much as she tried to position herself as a new beginning, didn't have the skills or vision to keep things running smoothly. They knew I was the one who had been delivering results, who had been keeping things together. They knew who had been fighting for their best interests. By the time I had made all those calls, it was clear that I wasn't just a former employee looking for revenge. I was a business owner, a force to be reckoned with. My clients weren't just numbers to me. They were the core of my business, the foundation I had built everything on, and now they were standing with me. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below, I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. But this wasn't just about the clients. It was about the bigger picture. It was about showing Rachel, the CEO, and everyone else who had underestimated me that I wasn't just a casualty of corporate politics. I was the one who had been carrying the weight of the company all along, and I was going to prove it. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless hours of paperwork. But I loved every second of it. It was hard work, yes, but it was the kind of work that mattered. I was building something new. I was creating my own path. I wasn't just trying to replace what I had lost. I was building something that was better, something that was truly mine. And as the momentum grew, so did my confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had found my footing and I had learned to trust myself again. It wasn't just about getting back at Rachel or the leadership. It was about proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms without relying on anyone who didn't believe in me. The real turning point came when I received an unexpected call from one of my biggest clients. This was the client that had always been the backbone of my success, the one who trusted me implicitly, and the one who had been with me since the very beginning. They had heard the rumors about what was happening at the company and they wanted to talk. When we met, they didn't waste time with pleasantries. They asked me straight up, "What's going on? What's your plan?" That was the moment everything clicked. I wasn't just fighting for my own success anymore. I was fighting for something bigger. This wasn't just about me getting back at Rachel. This was about creating a legacy, about proving that loyalty, hard work, and integrity meant more than nepotism and favoritism. And when I laid out my vision for my new business, they didn't just agree to work with me, they jumped on board. They were ready to help me take my company to the next level. They knew that the future of our work together wasn't just about surviving the chaos. It was about thriving in it together. And that was when I realized just how powerful this all was. It wasn't just about taking clients from the company. It wasn't about making Rachel and the CEO regret their decision. It was about creating something that was built on trust, on real relationships, and on a foundation of shared values. It was about showing everyone, including myself, that I could build something far more meaningful than I had ever imagined. But I wasn't naive. I knew that this was just the beginning. Rachel and the leadership weren't going to sit idly by and let me take what was theirs. I could feel the tension building, the pressure mounting. They were starting to see the impact of my decisions. But what they didn't realize was that the more they tried to undermine me, the stronger I became. The more they tried to tear me down, the more my clients and partners rallied behind me. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I knew the fight wasn't over. But I also knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them dictate my future any longer. The path I was on now was mine to shape, and I was going to make sure that it was everything they had tried to deny me. And with every new client, every new partnership, and every successful project I took on, I could feel it, the power shifting. The tables had turned. The moment I realized I had the upper hand, it was like everything clicked into place. The chaos and uncertainty of the previous weeks had sharpened my focus. I wasn't just in survival mode anymore. I wasn't just trying to outlast Rachel or her shady tactics. No, I had something far more important now: control. I had turned the tables, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. But the true power of my position didn't come from the clients who had followed me or the new business I was building. It came from the fact that I knew exactly how to play the game better than they did. I had learned their tactics, understood their moves, and figured out how to use them against them. Rachel, the leadership, they all thought they could get away with it, that they could quietly push me aside and bring in their own people without any repercussions. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to just take the loss and walk away. I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could replace me. It wasn't about revenge in the petty, childish sense. No, this was about justice. It was about showing them that I wasn't disposable, that I wasn't just some cog in their corporate machine. I was the one who had been driving results, who had been pulling the weight. And now that I had my own team, my own vision, and my own set of loyal clients, I was going to make sure they felt the full impact of their actions. I didn't act impulsively. I didn't just lash out. I was smarter than that. I was strategic. I knew that Rachel and her allies would be watching closely, waiting for any sign of weakness. They were counting on me to slip up, to make a mistake that would give them the upper hand. But they weren't going to get that satisfaction. Instead, I started making moves that would push them into a corner. Moves they didn't see coming. One of the first things I did was reach out to a few key figures within the company who had been on the fence about the direction Rachel was taking. These were people who had seen the cracks forming, who had quietly expressed concerns but hadn't yet acted. I wasn't asking them to abandon their posts or to side with me directly. I was simply offering them a choice: to stay on a sinking ship or to come aboard a vessel that was on the rise. It was subtle, but it was effective. The more I talked to these people, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one who felt betrayed. And that's when I started to see it clearly. The company was falling apart. It was all just a facade. Rachel had no real vision, no leadership skills. She was trying to steer the ship, but she had no idea where she was going. The foundation of the company was crumbling beneath her, and the people who had been loyal to the company for years were starting to notice. As this realization started to sink in, I knew it was time to make my next move. I didn't want to just be an alternative to Rachel's leadership. I wanted to be the new standard. I wanted to show the world that the real power wasn't in being the CEO's cousin. It wasn't in playing the nepotism game. It was in building something that mattered, something that lasted. I began positioning myself and my team as the true professionals. I made sure our work spoke for itself. I didn't just want to compete. I wanted to dominate. Our projects were polished, our clients were satisfied, and we delivered results that were far beyond what the company was offering under Rachel's direction. And when the inevitable comparisons started to happen, when the clients began to see the difference in quality, in professionalism, and in results, it was like watching a tidal wave crash against their fragile empire. But here's where it got really interesting. Rachel wasn't just losing clients. She was losing her grip on the people around her. She didn't have the respect of her colleagues, and it was becoming more and more apparent to everyone that she wasn't equipped for the role she had been thrust into. Meanwhile, I was building a loyal following of both clients and former employees who were beginning to realize that there was a way to work without being part of the in-crowd, without kissing the right rings. It was empowering, and it wasn't long before my new company started gaining momentum, attracting attention from industry leaders who were sick of the nepotism they saw elsewhere. And as much as Rachel and the others tried to put on a brave face, there were cracks appearing in their operation. The leadership team was starting to squirm. I knew it was only a matter of time before they'd come knocking at my door, desperate to get me back on their side, but by then, it would be too late. I wasn't the one who needed them anymore. They needed me. The satisfaction of seeing their empire begin to crumble was indescribable. There was a strange sense of vindication in knowing that the very system they had built, the one that had tried to undermine me, was now falling apart because they had tried to replace the wrong person. I wasn't just an employee anymore, I was a competitor, and I was playing the game on my own terms. As Rachel's team struggled to keep things afloat, I watched it all unfold with a sense of quiet triumph. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to rub it in their faces. The truth was in the numbers, in the clients who had followed me, in the success we were building. I knew that I had won, not just in a business sense, but in a moral sense. I had shown that loyalty, integrity, and hard work mattered more than connections and family ties. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. The bigger fight was still ahead. I wasn't just going to stop at winning back my place in the industry. I was going to keep pushing, keep innovating, and keep building something that was stronger and more resilient than anything they could ever create. Because in the end, it wasn't about the job, the power, or even the revenge. It was about proving that with the right people, the right vision, and the right strategy, you could build something that would last long after the nepotism and corruption had faded away. And that was the ultimate victory. As the pressure from Rachel and the leadership intensified, I knew the next phase of this battle wasn't going to be won with mere words or strategic moves. No, I needed something that would shake them to their core, something they couldn't ignore. This was where the game would take a sharp turn. It was time for the legal angle. I wasn't just going to let them get away with the way they had pushed me out. I had already taken control of the clients and the narrative, but now I needed to bring the fight into their world, the world of contracts, agreements, and legal ramifications. It wasn't enough to be successful in business. I had to make sure that their actions came with consequences, and I knew just how to do it. I had been carefully collecting evidence over the last few weeks. Emails, memos, phone records, and even the way the company had handled my termination. It was all there in black and white. The more I dug, the clearer it became. They had violated company policies, breached confidentiality agreements, and acted in bad faith. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. This was corporate misconduct, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. The first step was contacting my lawyer. We went over the evidence together, and I could see the shock in his eyes as we reviewed everything. It was clear to him, too, they had broken the law. He told me we had a solid case, one that would be impossible for them to dismiss. But we weren't going to go in guns blazing just yet. No, I wanted to make them sweat, to make them feel the fear of what was coming. With the legal groundwork laid, I started to make the next move. I sent a formal letter to the leadership, notifying them of my intent to pursue legal action unless we could come to an agreement. I wasn't asking for a settlement or a huge payout. I simply wanted them to acknowledge what they had done and for them to take responsibility for it. Of course, I wasn't naive. I knew they wouldn't respond well. But I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't going to back down. This was no longer a simple corporate rivalry. This was a matter of principle, and I was going to see it through. As expected, the response from Rachel and the leadership was nothing short of defensive. The moment they received my legal letter, it was like a switch flipped. They went into full damage control mode, scrambling to cover their tracks and protect themselves. At first, they tried to deny everything, dismissing my claims as baseless accusations, but the evidence was irrefutable. They couldn't hide behind the corporate shield anymore. The reality of what they had done was catching up with them, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would be exposed. I watched as their world started to crumble. The first sign of their downfall was the sudden change in their behavior. The smug confidence that had once filled their meetings disappeared, replaced by tension and uncertainty. The leadership team, who had once acted like they were untouchable, started turning on each other, throwing blame in every direction. The cracks in their armor were starting to show, but it wasn't just internal strife that was eating away at them. My clients, the ones who had followed me, the ones who had seen the value in what I was doing, began to take note of the legal action I had initiated. Word spread quickly. Rachel's carefully constructed facade of competence and leadership started to unravel piece by piece. The company that had once seemed so solid was now exposed as a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. And then came the first blow, a financial hit. One by one, the company started losing key contracts, the ones that had kept them afloat for years. Clients who had been hesitant at first, unsure of whether I could deliver, began to pull away from the company in droves. They didn't want to be associated with a business that was facing legal trouble, especially one that had been implicated in unethical practices. The leadership tried to reassure them, but it was too late. The trust was gone. The damage was done. As I watched all of this unfold, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the consequences of their actions caught up with them. They had taken everything from me, tried to erase me, but they hadn't accounted for one thing: I wasn't going to lie down. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was going to make sure they paid for what they did, not just to me, but to everyone they had wronged. As the dust began to settle and the last pieces of the old company crumbled, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The battle had been long and hard, but it wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about getting back at Rachel or the leadership. It was about something much bigger, something more meaningful. I had built something new, something that was not only successful but built on trust, integrity, and hard work. My clients, the ones who had stood by me, weren't just customers, they were partners. They had believed in me when the odds were stacked against us. And now, as we began to take on new projects, expanding and growing, I realized that the true victory wasn't just in beating the system. It was in creating something that truly mattered. But even more than that, I realized that my journey wasn't over. The struggles, the pain, the fight, they had taught me a valuable lesson. It wasn't enough to simply rise to the top. It wasn't enough to just build a successful business. What mattered now was how I used my success to lift others up. I started mentoring those who had been in my shoes, people who had been pushed aside, overlooked, or underestimated. I used my platform to advocate for fairness, for transparency, and for creating spaces where people could thrive based on their skills and integrity, not their family connections. The symbol of my success wasn't just the company or the clients I had won back. It was the impact I was making. It was the way I could now help others avoid the same fate I had suffered. It was about creating a legacy that was built not just on personal success, but on empowering others to succeed too. And so, the story came full circle. What started as a battle for survival had transformed into something far greater, a mission to change the way business was done, to ensure that integrity would always come first. And that, in the end, was the real victory.